If you can change someone's perspective, you can change the world. But more on that in a moment. Hello friends, my name is Michael McCauley. You are listening to Biocast Addendum, where we try to understand the chaos of the past. In this episode, we are going to be taking a look at Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin's propaganda that they used to not only establish the Soviet Union, but the propaganda they used to solidify their own power, to enforce state terror, and to change the minds of millions of people. So without any further ado, let's get right on into the episode. So one of the things you need to understand about propaganda is that it does not have to be, some kind of movie, some kind of documentary, or, some in-depth article with biased data. It doesn't have to be any of that. It can be one word. Literally one word can be propaganda. Now in the Soviet Union, that one word was Kulak. So when the Stalin was passed, it granted land ownership to peasants, and this was revised by the Soviets to add a new category of peasant landowners, the Kulaks. Because originally there were two, and it was basically peasants who had enough to survive, and there were really, really poor peasants. But then the word Kulak came in, and all of a sudden there was this new kind of peasant, a peasant who had more than he needed, more than his family needed. He had too much, one might say. And this was a really dangerous word, because it was applied subjectively. For a very long time, there was no legal or hard definition of what exactly it meant to be a kulak. If someone had clothes on their back but was completely homeless, and then there was another homeless person and they had no clothes, well, the guy with the clothes, you see, he's the kulak. And that's the really tricky situation that you run into with a word like kulak, because it's just really hard. And if you look at the ideology of communism, really it's based off of the whole concept of, well, I don't have enough for me, so I want to look at someone who has more than they need. I'm going to point my finger at them, get them killed, and I'm going to get to take their stuff. That's what communism really is. I don't have enough, you have more than enough, I'm going to kill you and take your stuff. Jealousy, that's like the fundamental core of communist thought. It comes from a really emotional place. And the word kulak is just an extension of that. Because originally it was the bourgeoisie. But you see, when you target the bourgeoisie long enough, the factory owners, the capitalists, the people that own the apartment buildings, once you target them enough, you eventually kill them all. You run out of bourgeoisie. And, well, who do we target now? Well, peasants that are just slightly better off than most peasants. So really, the smarter peasants. So it just turns into this horrible wheel of murder and genocide, and you eventually just start killing off, the wealthiest group of people in the country at a time, until you don't have any more wealth in your country. And that's the horrible reality of communism. Now, historian Robert Conquest noted, quote, "The land of the landlords had been spontaneously seized by the peasantry in 1917 and 18. A small class of richer peasants with around 50 to 80 acres had then been expropriated by the Bolsheviks. Thereafter, a Marxist conception of class struggle led to an almost totally imaginary class categorization being inflicted in the villages, where peasants with a couple of cows or 5 or 6 acres, more than their neighbors, were now being labeled kulaks, and a class war against them declared." And it was a really tragic cycle. It was really sad because a lot of these people that fell into the category of kulak, there were a good chunk of them that supported communism in the beginning. Because at first it was, hey, the people in the government, the bureaucrats, the clergy, the landowners, the capitalists, we don't want to hurt anyone. We just want to redistribute. We want to make things a little bit more equal. And it went from that to, yeah, we're going to kill anyone that has more than enough, to, we're going to kill anyone that has enough. We want everyone equally impoverished. Because in practice, that's what you get. That is what you get. And it really shows how powerful propaganda can be. One word loosely applied can take the lives of millions. And Kulak is the perfect example because so many people were wrongfully accused of being a Kulak and they were exterminated or sent to a labor camp or had everything that they ever worked for in their entire life, their entire family's lives, all of it taken away, stolen, redistributed to someone who didn't earn it. All because of the word Kulak. So eventually, the Sovnarkom, the Council of Commissars, they realized there was a problem here because anyone can be like, oh, hey, this guy has enough. This guy has enough. This guy has way more than enough. He has like 3 entire business suits. It can be just too loosely applied. Really, you can make an argument that anyone is a kulak. So they defined a technical definition after the Red Terror, of course. It was after, thousands and thousands of people were murdered and slaughtered, all this horror and misery and tragedy. After all of that, they were like, yeah, maybe we should have a technical definition. So here's what they came up with. If you use hired labor, and that's just so vague. So vague. If you need help, maybe you were trying to start some kind of a project or build something. You're just expected to do all of it on your own. You're just expected to you can't hire anyone. And then it really brings in the question of, well, everyone's a laborer now. If everyone's a laborer, who is hiring the laborers? Where do they get paid? It's like the communists didn't think that far ahead. No, you're not allowed to hire anyone. Everyone's a laborer. Well, where do we all go for work? What happens now? It is almost comical to think about because, we kind of have the benefit of, hindsight is 2020. We can look back and kind of laugh about how crazy some of these laws are. But, if you look at it, there were a number of people that signed on to a law for this. It went through an entire committee. It's just insane. We can debate whether or not the people in the committee should have been anywhere near any position of power, but that's a discussion for another time. So, ownership of a mill, a creamery, a butter-making rig, other processing equipment, or a complex machine with a motor. So, this makes you a kulak. If you have a mill, some really old technology, or and it's just too vague. Complex machine with a motor. What does that even mean? Is that including anything that you make on your own? Maybe there are some people that are really smart that they build their own stuff. Maybe someone builds some kind of rough, automobile kind of thing. What about those people? Are they kulaks because they spent all their free time and free effort and resources and everything to try to create something good or nice? Systematic renting out of agricultural equipment or facilities. Now, this is one of those really weird ones because it almost contradicts the last one. Because if you have agricultural equipment or facilities, what separates that from complex machine with a motor? Does the motor inherently make something too valuable? If you have some kind of agricultural equipment that, you see what I mean? That you can just really run into a lot of these really tricky what if kind of scenarios. And unfortunately, more often than not, if you could even loosely fit under some kind of accusation of one of these laws or rules, that was it for you. That was it for you. So it was just... But the other thing that you really have to pay attention to is renting out agricultural equipment or facilities Well, you can't rent it out. So if you can't use it today yourself, you can't use it at all. If you don't use your own stuff right now, so it really creates a horrible disincentive to have anything. Because the second that you put some of your maybe you have a little bit of extra money you save up, you want to buy a farm or some agricultural equipment or facilities or, whatever it is. What that's going to do is create a disincentive to do that, to work harder, to save, to plan a little ahead. It's going to take away that incentive because, well, if you don't work it every single day yourself with your own hands, well, that's it. It doesn't make you any money. It doesn't do anything for you day to day, unless you do it yourself. And unfortunately, that's just not effective. It's not efficient. And it really shows in the long run. I mean, it's the little things like this that are really responsible for making the Soviet Union so economically inefficient. We'll leave it at that. I don't want to use too strong of a word, but economically inefficient, I think, does a good enough job. Now, involvement in trade, money lending, commercial brokerage, or other sources of non-labor income. So if you buy something and it goes up in value in the free market and you sell it, you're a Kulak. You are a filthy capitalist. You're a class enemy. You are a traitor to the revolution and you deserve to be put to death. That's what that law says. If you buy something and you know it's going to go up in value and you sell it at some future point for anything more than you bought it for, you are a class enemy, a traitor of the Soviet Union. And one of the other things you have to pay attention to is who is really being hurt by laws like these. So for money lending, for example, it's not the money lenders who are being hurt by that. I'm sure they feel a little bit of pain because lending money is a really easy way to make money back. You have $10,000, you say, hey, listen, man, here's $10,000, pay it to me in dividends or every couple of months or so for the next couple of years. And you eventually pay me back a total of $12,000. And $2,000, I pocket that for giving you the loan in the first place. B says, okay, man, that sounds great. I'm going to be able to start a business with this. Everything works out fine. Everything's good and dandy. But you take away money lending as an option, well, no one's going to lend money anymore. The people that have the money, they're just not going to lend it out. They're going to say, well, I'm not going to make any money from lending it out, so why would I lend it out? Why would I? Human beings are not crazy enough to do random good acts of kindness for people for free. It just doesn't work like that. It just does not work like that. Even people that go out and do charity work and objectively good stuff, even those people have some kind of selfish motive behind it. They're doing it so they feel good about themselves. There is, maybe this is my cynicism painting a little bit too much of my worldview. But maybe there isn't a selfless act. Because when you do something good, you're trying to feel good as a result. Even if you take all of your money, every material wealth that you have, you sell it, your house, your car, all of your stuff, you sell it all, you give everything away to charity, you live like a monk or something like that. You're going to feel good about yourself for doing it. It might be a really, really tough thing to do. And I think we can all say if someone does do something like that, we should praise them. But again, it goes into, well, they're going to feel good about it. They're going to feel good about being praised for doing that. So there's always some kind of incentive behind doing things. It's very rare that people give to charity or, whatever for no reason. I mean, most of the time. Unfortunately, in America, people are doing it for tax write-offs. So, but anyway. So yeah, the people are just being devastated by laws like this. I mean, think about this is so many people. If you hire anyone, if you own a mill or any kind of processing equipment, or you rent out agricultural equipment, if you rent out your rare and very valuable rake that you rake your leaves with, if you rent that out, you're a kulak. If you lend money, you're a kulak. I mean, it's just horrible stuff. Horrible stuff. Now, the next big example of propaganda is Trotskyism. Now, you're going to have to wait for it. So there was a big power struggle after Lenin died. There were a lot of people vying for power, and here was the tricky part, right? Lenin didn't actually hold an official office. He just kind of played the role of the leader of the Soviet Union while he was alive. There wasn't an official office he was elected into, or he assumed, or like he had no real title. So when he died, there was just a big question of, well, what do we do now? No one really knew what to do. Lenin didn't really lay out a clear way forward. I don't think he was planning on dying so soon. The only thing that he really said in kind of his, last written will and testament and all that was, don't let Stalin take the power. And what did they do? They let Stalin take the power. Anyway. But so Lenin died, and there was just no way forward. Everyone was just trying to vie for power. All of these Bolsheviks, because a lot of them are just cynical pragmatists. And the two people that really stood a realistic chance of becoming the next Lenin, Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. And Trotskyism was actually a term invented by Stalin and the other Bolsheviks. Because what they did was, so they turned Trotsky's legitimate criticisms into a subversive movement. Because Trotsky was always a very outspoken critic of all the things that were going on. And he understood that he couldn't form some kind of a base. He couldn't create like an alternate political party or anything like that. He would have been killed outright. Like they would have been like, you're a traitor, you need to die. So he didn't do that. He just voiced his criticism honestly and openly for the whole world to see and hear. And a lot of people were like, oh, whoa, what do you know? Stalin is pretty bad, and this Trotsky guy has a bunch of really good ideas. There were a lot of people that fell into that camp. Trotsky never organized these people, but Stalin and his cronies, they created Trotskyism. They turned it into a movement. There was, I believe it was Zinoviev, who privately said to Trotsky years later, well, we were going to eventually target you anyway. After all, we were the guys that created Trotskyism. And I could just imagine being Trotsky in that moment where they straight up tell you, they're like, yeah, we invented this movement. Yeah, publicly, we're persecuting and watching you because we're saying, this is your movement based off of your criticisms, but we created it. That is sadistic, evil, man. That's just horrible stuff. The good news is that Zinoviev, the guy that took part and said that to Trotsky, he ended up going to the Gulag and getting killed by Stalin anyway. In fact, just about all the old Bolsheviks did, because Stalin had this insane paranoia of, someone doing exactly what Joseph Stalin did. He was like, well, I cynically killed people and stabbed everyone in the back and stole power for myself. Well, someone else is just waiting to do the same thing. It's really funny, actually, because it really goes to show that even when you're as dark as Joseph Stalin, there are some principles of the human brain that remain constant. And I always think of this one, that when you have some kind of disposition, when you are a certain way, you see more of that in the world than there actually is. So if you're some kind of cynical, Machiavellian, backstabbing politician, a snake, basically. If you're that kind of snake, well, you're going to see that in everyone else. everyone around you is going to be a snake because guess what? That's what you are. So, interesting little insight there. One of Lenin's big pieces of propaganda was actually a Marxist maxim. This was his favorite one. Property is theft. And this one is powerful because it has a lot of unspoken messaging drawn into, the words itself. So the unspoken meaning, what you have is stealing from someone else. So just by merit of you owning something, you are taking from me. That's what that means. When you say property is theft, you are calling anyone that owns anything a thief. Again, we can see by how horribly things went in the Soviet Union where this kind of propaganda gets you. I would just like to take a moment and say bravo to all of these Soviet thinkers. As evil as they were very smart. This is like some of the propaganda in here was really smart. I mean, especially Stalin creating the Trotskyist movement. I mean, that's such a cynical, brilliant move that, I'd like to think if I were some kind of evil dictator, that's the kind of stuff I would be doing. Anyway, so the other thing that really played a big role in Stalin and Lenin's propaganda was extreme polarization. It colored everything in life. Everything was this all-out extreme class struggle. I mean, everything just had this Marxist, extremist, militant lens applied to it. So Lenin wrote in 1918, quote, "I know that there are, of course, sages who think that they are very clever and even call themselves socialists, who assert that power should not have been seized until the revolution had broken out in all countries. They do not suspect that by speaking in this way, they are deserting the revolution and going over to the side of the bourgeoisie." I mean, you see where it just becomes this massive, slippery slope of genocide. First, it starts out as, we're killing the monarchists. Okay, now we're killing the bourgeoisie. Okay, now we're killing the capitalists. Now we're killing the kulaks. Now we're killing the people who are socialists, but who don't want a revolution until everywhere is socialist. I mean, it does not stop. It does not stop. And I almost feel like this is one of those things where you can almost diagnose someone with a mental illness. Just imagine really thinking this. And that's the most powerful takeaway with all of this propaganda. The people that read it and believe it, that's one thing, right? But the people who write that propaganda, the people who create the propaganda, they're the ones that you really need to be worried about. So another really scary thing about all of this was Stalin and the Politburo passing a new law in 1927 stating that, quote, "persons propagating opposition views be regarded as dangerous accomplices of the external and internal enemies of the Soviet Union, and that such persons be sentenced as spies by administrative decree." So it takes a couple years, right? Lenin was writing that kind of extremist stuff back in 1918. And here is Stalin in 1927 putting some of this extremist, where the propaganda goes from the minds into the law of the land. Because once something becomes the law, it's really hard to change laws. Everyone always talks about, just rip up the laws and forget about it. It does not work that way. When it is on the books, it is there for a very, very long time. And by Joseph Stalin passing a law like this, I mean persons propagating opposition views. That's anyone that says anything not good about the Soviet Union. If you even legitimate criticisms, and again, think back to Trotsky, who wanted nothing more than Soviet success. Leon Trotsky was a true communist, a Marxist, a revolutionary, and he had legitimate criticisms. But under a law like this, he was to be regarded as an enemy or a spy or whatever. I mean, it's just insane. It's just insane. And this eventually turned the Soviet Union into free-range genocide. As a result of all of this propaganda being pushed out by Stalin and Lenin and all the other Bolsheviks and communists and Marxists and whoever else, because of them, tens of millions of people are going to die. So keep in mind, when you change someone's perspective, you can change the world, but you can also change it for the worse. That's going to be it for the episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys would like to check out Biocast, a link to everything will be in the description down below. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the podcast wherever it is you're listening, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.